a link to the website that you can look at for more background about this. And so I'll turn it over to my colleague Sara Smith-Silverman first to kind of situate us within the current context, and then our long-awaited guest speaker. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. I teach women's history here. I started here a couple of years ago, and when I was thinking about ways to introduce this event, I had a couple of things in mind, and a couple of things that are in the news right now, and one of them is about the fact that the district attorney in Sacramento refused to indict the police officers who killed Stephon Clark, and then I was thinking about the larger Black Lives Matter movement and what that has to do with the theme of nonviolence, right? That's the theme this year of nonviolence. So I want to just highlight the role that Black women have played in the Black Lives Matter movement in this moment in particular. You might know that 3 women, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Cullors, actually created the hashtag Black Lives Matter and helped to found the Black Lives Matter movement in 2012. This was in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who killed the unarmed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in 2012. So it's 3 women who are responsible, right, for starting the Black Lives Matter movement here. And in talking about the importance of Black Lives Matter, this movement that they helped to start, Garza emphasized that Black Lives Matter is, quote, an ideological and political intervention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise, unquote. So the women who started Black Lives Matter alongside many others have, of course, continued in the last several years to organize, to call attention to the killing of Black people, including the killing of unarmed Black men by police officers, and the fact that it's very rare for any police to ever be indicted on the charge of killing an unarmed Black person in this country. So, you know, from the 18-year-old Mike Brown, who was killed in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, to the death of just a year ago of 22-year-old Stephon Clark, killed by Sacramento police, you know, just a year ago. So, but because Black Lives Matter is led by Black women, even though the media tends to pay a lot of attention to the deaths of Black men, the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement have also, right, tried to draw attention to police brutality and the police murders and other kinds of killings of Black women and girls as well. So they, for instance, coined the hashtag Say Her Name after 28-year-old Sandra Bland was arrested on a minor traffic violation in 2015 and then found dead in her cell 3 days later. So this hashtag Say Her Name, right, is meant to, still used to this day, meant to draw attention to the fact that also Black girls and women are brutalized and also killed in our society, and it's very seldom that we see accountability for the people who commit these acts of violence. But locally, we also have a local Black Lives Matter chapter, which is very much led by women, Black women like Tanya Faison, who has been tireless in her work, trying to call attention to the police brutality and the killings of unarmed Black men here in Sacramento. You know, holding countless protests in the past year, urging the district attorney of Sacramento to indict the police officers who killed Stephon Clark. So women are really, Black women are really like carrying the struggle forward, and I think it's important to highlight their work. And we have, of course, our district attorney, Anne-Marie Schubert, who refused to indict after a whole year of making no announcement. Just very recently, she said that she is not going to indict the police officers who killed Stephon Clark in his grandmother's backyard. So I think that this makes clear, right, that this is a local issue, this is national and local, and that the justice system in Sacramento is also broken, that it continues not to value Black lives. And I think it's important for us, right, to not just say this and celebrate the Black women who are engaging in this struggle, but also to say, why we should join them in struggle as well. And even when we are disappointed by decisions like this, it's important for everybody to call attention to what's happening. So that was the first thing I just wanted to emphasize, because I know that's on a lot of people's minds. And the second thing is that, you know, in New Zealand on Friday, I'm sure you've all heard the news that there were 50 Muslims who were killed by a white supremacist. So just a few days ago, men and women killed in 2 mosques, 50 of them. And so I didn't really prepare many remarks about this, but I did want to say that the Muslim students on this campus, the Muslim Student Association, they are organizing a vigil that's today, and it goes from 4:15 to 5:30 p.m. It's inside the club room, which is in the hub, I believe, right? The club room. So I thought I would just pass out some flyers and urge you to, if you can, to attend this event as well, the vigil, in solidarity with Muslim students who, of course, are hurt right now because of this incident that happened not long ago.
All right, and it is my pleasure.
Hello everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Professor Leonhardt, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. Thank you. Another field in which women are not given justice, sadly, is religion, because it is supposed to be the origin of all justice in the world. So I am a pastoral resident. I am an Arab Christian from Lebanon. I work for the church. If I sometimes use some terminology that is not familiar, please raise your hand and interrupt me so I can explain it to everyone. Okay, a little background about myself. Though I didn't grow up in a family of believers, but I became interested in my religion at a young age, and I became active in church, and that was okay. Go to church as you may like, but it isn't until I started expressing my interest in going into the field of ministry that my society and including my church community started questioning me. I expressed my interest in joining seminary at age 17. And at that time, as a good Middle Eastern father, my father didn't let me. And as a good Middle Eastern daughter, I had to obey my parents, and I went to college and got a degree in computer science. And it isn't until 7 years later that I could finally join seminary in the hope of becoming the first Arab pastor. Because when I went to seminary, the church was not ordaining women. Ordination is the process by which you become a religious leader. And for the first couple of years, I was the only Arab woman at seminary. The other females were all exchange students. So there was no chance, there was no hope that I would go anywhere with that. But I had faith that this is where I'm called to be. This is the path that I'm called to take. And it's a fight. It's a battle. We've been trying to fight for a long, long time. And I decided that if I feel called to do this, no one is in any position to tell me that I'm not. So I kept going. And later, the church started ordaining women, and I wasn't the first, but it's okay. However, my heart still aches at the fact that they are still selective in their process. They still deny some people's ordination, and in my opinion, unjustly so. So a lot of questions could be asked about why, at a time like this, the church is still denying the leadership of women. And I wanted to give you a little historical background about the Arab church, about the Middle Eastern church. And before that, I just wanted to give you some geography first for those of you who have never heard of Lebanon. It is in Southwest Asia. See this little tiny country that is half the size of the state of New Jersey, and it's kind of the link between the three continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. And here's a closer look at the Arab world. It's bordered by the Mediterranean. So, back to our topic. As I mentioned already, well, just to make something clear, because some people do not really know what it is like to be and to live in the Arab world. Though women are not 100% looked at as equal to their male counterparts in many different fields, but we do have women CEOs of companies, women directors of schools and colleges. Women do hold high posts and leadership positions in different organizations, except for the religious organizations. So I have quick questions for you. When do you think was the first female priest in the Christian church? Anyone has any idea? Like a wild guess. So 1647 until 1651. And she was ordained, she wasn't ordained, she was the first woman to preach in the Quaker community. And if you notice, I said it's from 1647 until 1651. She stopped doing that because she was silenced and disciplined for that. She wasn't official. The first woman to be officially ordained in America was in 1815. When do you think was the first Jewish woman ordained as rabbi? Yes, but 1935, and that happened in Germany. She's the first female rabbi in the world. It wasn't until 37 years later that the first female rabbi was ordained in America in 1972. That's pretty late. When do you think was the first female imam in the Muslim faith? 2003. And that happened in Canada, not even in the Arab world, which is the cradle of Islam. Yes. So this is modern history, okay? If we look at ancient history, we will be hit by a very interesting fact, which is that in the first civilizations of the Mesopotamia and the Sumerian, Akkadian civilizations, they had prominent female priestesses in ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, in Hinduism, in Buddhism. You hear about all those great women priestesses in history. So what happened, right? And then in Christianity, in the Bible, there is a place where Paul sends a letter to the Romans in which he mentions a deacon in the church called Phoebe, and that letter is dated to roughly the year 70, 75 AD, the 1st century, and we have reports going back to the 5th century that talk about women who had leadership positions in churches. And I think civilizations are supposed to move forward, not backwards, right? So we just wonder what happened. So I'm going to give you a few facts about my own environment where I grew up and what I think is the reason behind this backwards movement in women empowerment. So in the Arab culture, it is shameful for a woman to represent a man. It is shameful for a man that a woman would speak on his behalf. Now it goes the other way around, no problem with that. Yeah. And so I mentioned that my church finally did ordain a woman, and that was only 2 years ago. The Reformed Christian tradition is belongs to the minority Protestant, which is a minority in the Christian, which is a minority in the Middle East. So the only denomination that theologically believes that it's okay to ordain women, it's okay for women to lead worship, is a minority within a minority within a minority. And that makes our voices very, very, very low, facing a whole culture that is still opposing women ordination based on religious reasons, not only cultural. And, you know, many of our countries in the Middle East haven't had a real state of stability and like politically or economically since the formation of those countries. Some others have had latest events in their history, like in Egypt. The biggest Presbyterian church in the Arab world is in Egypt, and when the Presbyterians ordained a woman in Lebanon, the Egyptians went to their leaders and said, hey, Lebanese people ordained their first woman, what about us? And the leaders said, go and come back in 10 years. You're not allowed to open this subject until 10 years from now. Now that makes me mad, but you know, if you think about the latest political events in Egypt, the Arab Spring and all the extremist, Islamist, fundamentalist movements that were created, do you really want to challenge that society? And this is a question that has been facing us, Arab Christian women who aim at holding positions in leadership. And I've had conversations with all 4 licensed preachers in Lebanon and Syria, and all of them had the same attitude towards it. I do believe that I'm called to be there, but how can we do it in a peaceful way without challenging the society? You know, I can come and be ordained in the States and go back to Lebanon as an ordained pastor. There's nothing wrong with that. But what am I saying to my culture? What am I saying to my society? It's really important to weigh that theological and that societal aspect. How can we do it in a way that does not challenge people and for them to accept us? A lot of movements happened in history. They tried to open this subject in 1976. The Middle East Council of Churches created this program that shed the light on the absence of women leadership in the church, and it was under the Human Rights Department because it's a human rights issue. And then because of all the opposition that they got, they had to move it to the Education and Renewal Department, and that's only to keep the program going, because otherwise they'd have to shut it down. The discussion of female ordination after that was not allowed until the 1995. The Reformed Synod started giving preaching license to some women in 1993. And this is the first female licensed preacher who said this statement. She said that she did not allow women to open that topic because she thought that they did not believe that they can do it yet. The topic was revisited in 2005. Those preachers were put on, there was a suggestion to give them the same salary that is given to their male counterparts. But then, of course, the patriarchs of our church didn't like it, and then it never happened. They vetoed it, right? 2010, again, Fellowship of Middle Eastern Council of Churches met in January in Beirut. I was there at the meeting, and they encouraged, again, their member churches to ordain women, and they talked about it culturally, theologically. They had this recommendation. Nothing happened until 7 years later. So the reason why most of the leaders in the church said they cannot ordain women is they don't want it. The churches are not ready. The society is not ready. I partly believe that. But being in church since a young age, I know the people. I know that there are many people who are ready for it. It's the sexist leaders in church who are not ready for it. And I wanted to call them out on it. So I conducted a survey in the Synod churches, and I asked 5 people from every church and the leader of the church. I asked them, what do you think? Would you agree to have a woman pastor in your church? And I chose people from different ages, genders, positions. And then in 15 churches, 88 interviewed persons, half males, half females. These are my findings. So as you notice, the numbers are close. Interestingly, the age, the position, even the gender of the interviewed people did not have an impact on their opinion. I thought, most females would be with, most males would be against. No, it was irrelevant. See that roughly 75 to 80% of the people, and you have to understand the Synod of Syria and Lebanon covers the entire area all the way from northern Syria until south of Lebanon. And that's a very varied area. There are the very conservative small towns in Syria where people literally still live in tents. And there are the liberal places in Beirut that have been very westernized. It's people from very different backgrounds, educational backgrounds and societal backgrounds. And it's not the society. Those people were 75% ready for that change. And now if you're if you're wondering, my home church had 100% no, including the pastor. It was very discouraging. It was my second year in seminary. And at that time, I thought I had no reason to keep going on. I really had no reason. My own church is rejecting me. But here's what I noticed, what I noted from this survey. In the churches where a woman actually had a position of leadership and was active in the church, that reflected positively. That had 100% yes impact on that church. And the other finding is that whenever a certain pastor of a certain church is with, you see that almost all of the congregants are with. When the pastor is against, of course, right? People follow their leaders. So model and leadership were the 2 criteria that I found were played a big role in women empowerment. So what we really needed was a trailblazer, a woman who would be willing to say, you know what? I want to be a case study for history, but I want to pave the way for others. So I went and talked to all 4 licensed preachers, tried to push them, tried to challenge them. do you want to be the person who makes the news? Do you want to be the person who risks dividing her church? Do you want... No, none of them wanted to be that person. Because you never know, right? We live in the Arab world. Finally, in 2017, Rula Sleiman became the first ordained woman in the Middle East and in the Arab world. And to prove even more that society had nothing to do with it, Rula's church is located in one of the most conservative areas of North Lebanon. It is kind of like the capital of Islam in Lebanon. And not that there's a problem with that, is that when you blame the society and when you say that the society around us is not ready, you're wrong, because Rula is accepted by all of her entourage. She was voted 100% by her church. However, she had to lead that church for 9 years before they finally requested her ordination. But hey, she's there. Najla Kassab followed her. And then after that, unfortunately, the third licensed preacher who has been director of Christian education in one of our biggest evangelical schools in the country was denied ordination under the excuse that you don't have a valid argument to want to be ordained. That saddens me even more because their reasons are theological. You make excuses to exclude people and you ascribe them to religion. That's very sad. Now the last one, she's an interesting, has an interesting case because she was married to a pastor. And when I talked to her, she said, you know, there is this rule that the pastor has to live by his or her parish in the same town, and you have to know that in Lebanon and Syria, it's not like here. There is one church per town or per like 10 towns, right? Because we're minorities. And so they said, so if your pastor is leading a church and you're leading a church and you have a family, you have to live together. How's that working for you? You have to live separately. And then I went to the polity book and tried to find that rule, and I didn't find it. And I called that person again, who is now the president of the Evangelical Synod. And I said, hey, I couldn't find that rule anywhere. And he said, well, it's not written in any book. It's common sense. You exclude someone based on a rule and you call it common sense. So she emigrated. And so did I. Now, needless to say, I wasn't very well accepted by my church because of my confrontational personality. I do believe in peaceful change, but I do not believe that peace comes without pushing buttons. That's different than violence. So I kept calling people out on their sexism, and I kept naming things for what they are. And doors in Lebanon were closed for me, but doors to Sacramento were open. All the rejection that I faced in my country did not really discourage me from pursuing my calling. I know I don't fit in that church, but I know that I fit in somewhere else. And allow me to share this with you. My personal faith is what kept me going. I believe that if you're called to do something or be somewhere, no one is in any position to tell you that you're not. And I have seen and experienced God using me to touch other people's lives. So I kept going. And coming to Sacramento wasn't easy. When I was, between the time I accepted the job and the time my visa was ready, the administration changed in America, and my attorney at that time told me not to have high hopes. Visas were denied by the dozens, but I got mine. And then I had it renewed. So now I'm here. I am a pastoral resident in multicultural ministry, which means my job has two sides to it. The first part of my job is that I serve the church. I write liturgy, I preach, I lead worship, I attend to people's needs, I visit people in the hospitals, I do pastoral care and counseling. And the second part of it is that I do outreach ministry to the Arabic-speaking refugees in Sacramento. Most of those refugees belong to the Muslim faith. I personally, and as the church I represent, we do not care what anyone's faith is. Our ministry is ministry of compassion to others. It's a ministry of just spreading peace, try to help those people assimilate to the American society. Well, this is a picture of me with the leadership of my church. As Dr. Leonhardt mentioned, I am also selected as the Presbytery, which is the higher council of my church. The Mission Support Committee of the Presbytery asked me to be their international visitor for this year, which means I go to also different churches in the Presbytery and try to educate them on what it means to be an Arab, what it means to be a Christian Arab, what it means to live in a culture marked by Islam and still have your faith and live in peace with your siblings from different faiths. And I mainly do that by inviting members of the Muslim refugee community with me to churches. And we go there and we talk to the people. We make cultural events. We cook Syrian food for them, music, dancing. We just show them what it is like to just be a person. And maybe not have a religion for a moment, just be a person. So this is what I'm doing. I invite churches and other religious or non-religious organizations to host those cultural events. Sometimes I ask for donations that I use to empower the refugee community. I'm currently also, this is one of our cultural events. This is one of my friends from the refugee community. He's from Syria, and he was sharing his experience of the war. Enjoying delicious Syrian food. And these are my friends from the refugee community cooking some food. Yeah, that's what you expect when you invite Arabs for lunch. I don't know if I don't think I've mentioned that the church that I'm currently serving is Japanese American. So I also get exposed to all kinds of cultural exchange events. And the last thing that I do for the refugee community is I also volunteer as an English teacher. So I'm currently the core grammar teacher for the Sacramento ESL program, but my next project is to have a class that is only for Arabs, and specifically Arab women. One what people do not know is that most of the refugees that are coming from Syria and Iraq, they come on a special immigrant visa, and those are the people who were helping the American government while back in their countries, and they're mostly the males, the head of the family. And those males, husbands, fathers, they speak the language to a certain degree. They can drive, they come here, they have something to do. But then you have all those women who do not speak English, who cannot drive, who cannot communicate with people, who are just, homebound. The kids, they go to school, they learn, and the category of the refugees that is most marginalized is women. So what I'm trying to do is create those events to empower women by giving them something to do, by giving them something to give. So my next project is to open a class in English class for Arab women. That's all I wanted to share about my work. On a final note, I just wanted to say that I believe that I'm in Sacramento at this time for a good reason. And just as Sara mentioned, the latest, religious political events that are happening in the world around us today, I feel like people like me who know both worlds enough are called to be witnesses and peacemakers. And I believe that I have a role in being a bridge. And I want all of you to think that we are all called to be peacemakers, whether you're in a position to touch 100 lives, or even if it was one life, it's worth it. Know your calling, because I'm sure you have one. Thank you very much for listening.